Good morning, everybody, from the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Livestock Systems and from the University of Florida. And this is our first webinar. I am Marietta Eilita, I'm the Deputy Director for the lab. And this first webinar will be given by our Communications Manager, Jim Harper. And it will focus on a very important topic. How is it that as scientists we can communicate better with the public? What are the kinds of issues that we should be focusing on? What are the types of things that we should be thinking about as we are communicating with the public? We will be, in the coming months, we will be having other webinars. We will be communicating about those with you. And some of those topics will be focusing on more kind of technical issues, such as the different cross-cutting themes that we have in the lab. And we hope that in this way we will all be learning together and sharing experiences also of the lab as we progress in the coming years and months. So thank you very much, and I will have Jim now to start. And afterwards, please feel free to stay on for questions and comments. And we will be here to discuss with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Marietta. As she said, my name is Jim Harper, and I'm the Communications Manager for the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Livestock Systems. And I just want to say I'm very grateful to be here. And to be working with such impressive and intelligent people. It's also a bit intimidating, so please forgive any mistakes that happen today. I want this to be an open conversation that we begin to work together, and I want to emphasize that I'm here as a resource for all of you. Please connect with me, share your ideas, and let's collaborate after this webinar and on into the future. So I'm going to share the screen now. So let's get started. This webinar is about communicating with the public, and it's intended for principal investigators, but also for other people who are researchers, scientists, and interested in reaching out to a much broader audience than they have in the past in order to reach the largest potential audience. So we'll be talking about audiences, messages, and just the art of communication. So let's start with a little science communication humor. As you can see, the scientist is asking, what is it in this cartoon? And he's looking at a picture on the wall, which is an abstract painting. And the person who heard the message from the scientist says, you said to do an abstract. And so this is an example of miscommunication. Actually, the scientist said the right thing, but the receiver misunderstood the message. So that's always a possibility. We always have to remember miscommunication happens all the time, and we're going to need to correct for that. One way to correct is to repeat messages over and over. But you can't control what the other person is thinking about. So you might be thinking about the science and how important it is. The other person is thinking about what they're going to have for dinner. So the objectives for today are basically to inspire you and motivate you to take some of the initial steps in this journey to connect with the general public. Although I like to just call them people, because the general public is the broadest audience possible, and we're going to think about breaking it down into smaller segments. But really, this is a two-way interaction with people that you probably don't know, but want to initiate a dialogue and connect with. And also, I want to inspire you to be willing to invest time in communicating. I know you're very busy people, and that this could be seen as another burden, but I want you to think of it as an opportunity. It does take time and takes practice, just like any muscle. You need to work out in order to make it strong and to make it better and better over time. And I do believe that you already know how to do this. You have the skills to do it. It may just be a matter of not having the time or not putting in the time. And I believe that you can do this because you have done it in the past in many different ways. You know how to tell stories, and that's kind of the basics of of communicating with the public. And that through your research, as you go through every stage, that you will practice reaching out to more and more diverse audiences. So I just want to give a reminder to all of you, because you know this already, but what are the steps to having a good talk, a good presentation? Well, 3 steps. You know, you want to tell your audience what you're going to say. You're going to introduce your talk. Then you're going to give the presentation, send your messages, and then you're going to remind your audience what you said. So hopefully I'm going to try and model best practices here. So I'm going to tell you about the context for science communication, the perspective of non-scientists, defining the public audience and what we mean by that. Talking to an individual is my personal take on working with the public. Some theories of mass communication that might help you to frame these exercises. And I am going to give you some challenges and homework to get social and practice some new forms of communication. And then I'll touch on working with the popular press and mass media. So why do you have to communicate with the public? Why is this important? And why should you be investing more time in this? Because there will be a payoff. I think, if you think about public support for science and research, it can really vary with the winds of opinion. So we want to make sure that people are thinking about science and learning about it continuously. In terms of your outreach to the public, it's going to take practice, and I really want to encourage you to start now and gradually, incrementally improve your practice over time. So don't wait till the end of your projects to share your exciting results. Start now, sharing the process, sharing what you're learning today, tomorrow, and build an audience and trust over time. As you do this outreach, it can really go viral. It can spread far and wide across the globe with today's very interactive social media environment. So that's a really exciting thing. It can be a little intimidating as well, but really it's a great opportunity for you to reach people you've never been able to reach before. And another reason to do this is because you have to. You've been funded to do research, or you're working on projects that have been funded by USAID and the American people. And so they want to know, how's this money being spent? And you need to communicate and let people know that this money is being spent wisely, and we have exciting things to share with you. And we're developing here at the Livestock Lab our own communication strategy, and that's here to support all of you, support your research, and to help you advance. And I also want to just repeat that I'm here as a form of support for you. And I believe in your organizations, at your universities and your centers, there are other communication professionals, and I really encourage you to reach out to them. You're probably very comfortable communicating scientist to scientist, so we're not really dealing with that topic today. We're thinking about the scientist who's reaching out to the much broader world, which can be somewhat of an unknown, and we're going to try and make it more of a manageable prospect for you. So here I wanted to share some wisdom from a famous conservationist in the US. Her name is Rachel Carson. And she said that conservation is a cause that has no end. There is no point at which we will say our work is finished. And I want to say the same thing about communication. There's really no finish line, no end point. And it's really a dialogue. It's something that happens continuously. So think of that as a continuous opportunity as well, that there's always room to improve. There's always room to correct mistakes and to move forward. And that this is something you'll be practicing your entire life. So it's great, your entire career. It's great to invest the time now, because it's really going to pay off year after year. I also want to show some pictures of the places where we work around the world, because we're in very diverse places. Each of us has a unique context that we're working in with cultural sensitivities, and you know your stakeholders and you know your context. So I'm not here today to give you very specific advice at how how to reach the people in Nepal or Rwanda, Niger, or Ethiopia, because that's beyond my capabilities. But I think you have that expertise, and you know people as well who have that expertise. You may know communicators in those countries and who can work with those stakeholders to help you reach them. So I just want to emphasize that. I'm here to give a perspective, to give some advice and start a conversation. But when it comes to working on the ground in these places, you know the experts, and you are also experts in working with these stakeholders. So when we think about a researcher or scientist perspective versus the public's perspective, it's really kind of an upside down situation. And this is really something I want to emphasize, because both perspectives are completely valid. In our day-to-day interactions as scientists, we're really focused on this upside down triangle where we have to present something in peer-reviewed journals in a certain prescribed way. So you want to present the background, then the supporting details, and then at the end, finally, you get to results and conclusions. And for the public, it's really quite the opposite. So they're eager to know, what is the bottom line? Why does this matter to me? And so what? Is this important? And then at the end, once you have their attention, then you can get to those supporting details. So this is from AAAS, which is a great resource for scientists. And I really want us to keep this image in mind. Second. All right, so you might have to turn your brain upside down in order to reach the audiences that you want to. So who is this public audience we're thinking about today? Is it just a massive crowd of unknown faces? Well, I want to take a line from the US political playbook and say that all politics is local, and so is communication. It has a personal context. All communication really starts with a one-to-one personal connection. And in terms of defining who the general public is, it's really anyone. It's anyone who's unfamiliar with your work with the potential to learn about it. But each one is an individual who has an individual point of view. So I want you to think about one person, and this could be someone in your family, could be your neighbor, someone who may not be familiar with your work, to represent that public, that audience that you want to reach out to. And of course, we have many, many different types of audiences. So each one can be considered a subset of the public. So we have producers and processors. We have our own academic community, which we may be comfortable communicating with, but we're trying to reach out to now a broader audience, to the wider population. So who are these people? They're a set of individuals who may not be familiar with your work, but we're going to inspire them to learn about it. So let's take a couple examples from the countries where we work, such as in Ethiopia. If you look at this photograph, you can start to imagine this group as an audience. And who is this audience? What are they concerned about right now in their daily lives? And why should they listen to you, to what you have to say? Think about their perspectives, what's going on in their minds. And then also hone in on one individual in this photo. If you were going to start a conversation with an individual, which person would you talk to? And I would suggest you start there. Start with that person that you're most comfortable communicating with, and then move on to the next and the next until you have an audience formed. I was fortunate enough to visit Nepal in February and to meet some of these stakeholders. And here's a representative person, I'm calling her Nana, and she's a smallholder in a small village. And I was really impressed when I met her. She's a very vibrant person and was very open in sharing of her household. This is her shed with her livestock. And she talked to us about how much she loves her cows and how when she can't eat and the cows can't eat, she goes and she talks to them like it's her daughter. That's what she said to us. This cow's like my daughter. And I say to her, if I can't eat and you can eat today, it's okay, we'll eat tomorrow. So I remember her perspective and her words. And when I think about reaching out to someone like her, I really have to keep that context in mind. keeping her age, gender, all these different things in mind as a representative of an audience of smallholders living in Nepal. So how would you reach someone like her? Well, I really think that one-to-one communication is still the best form. And so I really want to encourage you, whenever you can, to go out into the field and reach individuals like this face-to-face. And so for her, there are dairy cooperatives and women's groups and other ways that you can interact face-to-face, or perhaps there's a mediator, such as a Sentry from one of our projects, that already has that as a task to go and to talk to people like her. So even if you can't do it directly, you might know someone who can mediate those face-to-face interactions. And then I'm also thinking, well, she may not be literate or may not have time. She has to get up at 4 in the morning to milk her cows. She doesn't have time to read the newspaper. So I think there's some other media that Heifer International, Nepal, for example, has created for their mastitis project. And one is a radio public service announcement. And this is a really inexpensive and effective way to reach a really broad audience. So I really applaud their efforts to do that. And also, as you see here, this poster, which is mostly based on drawings and is really easy to interpret. And I think this is something that could be shared in communal spaces where someone like Nana would see it. It would be great if someone's there also to help interpret it and remind her of these important procedures. So think about different media, different ways to reach the individual who's part of this public audience that you're trying to reach. So your first challenge is going to be to work with an individual. So I want you to explain your research to an elder or to a friend, could be a neighbor, and it's someone who doesn't know about your work but has the potential to learn about it. As you do this exercise, this first challenge, I want you to practice using plain language, and I want you to be brief. So this would be a type of elevator speech, as we call it. And an elevator speech refers to a situation where you're trapped in an elevator. Let's say you're in an elevator with Bill Gates, and you have 30 seconds to explain to him why he should fund your research, okay? You have a very short amount of time. You have to squeeze all this information into 30 seconds. So think about creating that elevator speech in your mind, even on paper, write it out so you have it ready to use at any moment. And this should be applicable to all kinds of audiences. When you're talking to this person, don't be condescending. Realize that they do have the potential to learn, and maybe they are more motivated than we think to learn about your work. You don't want to preach and tell them exactly what to do. You want to create a dialogue where you're sharing and listening your experiences and learning about the other person's experience. So I would encourage you, when you reach out to your neighbor, to ask them first, what do I do? What do you think my job is? See what they have to say, because you may be interested and learn something from them. And then share your version and then have them repeat it back to you. What did you learn from what I said, what I shared? And it's great to work with somebody you already know because they already trust you. And that's really one of the biggest issues that we deal with. You know, scientists who are trying to share their information might come up against a wall of mistrust from the public, from various audiences who don't understand why you're doing this research or why you're interrupting their lives. But with someone you already know, you don't have to worry so much about that issue. You already have that trust. Okay, so this is a great challenge for you to practice reaching out to someone you already know who trusts you and is going to listen to you and can help you to hone your elevator speech skills and your general outreach skills. So now I want to talk a little bit about the power of communication, because this is also the reason why we do this and why we try to get our messages out to such a broad audience. Typically, communications theory talks about mass media or the popular media, the news, and so on. And what their real power is, the power of the mass media, is to control conversations. They can help decide what people are talking about today, what's on their minds. So then that really is a great power. So think about that. That's the power also that you have through using them and using channels of mass media to help set the agenda. And so there are a couple of theories called agenda setting and framing theory. And really, I just wanted to kind of gloss over and not go into details about it, but you can borrow some things from this theory. Basically, when you're communicating, you want to get people's attention first, have them look at what you're doing. You know, videos today seem to be a really popular way to get people's attention. And then once you have their attention, you've motivated them to listen more, then you can add the meaning and help guide them to understand and transfer that information that you want them to have. But they're not going to accept the information until you have their attention. So you want to guide an individual who is a potential audience member by answering some very fundamental questions. Okay, the first one is, who cares? Why should I care about your research when I'm concerned about my finances, my family, somebody's sick? I have my own health issues. I'm really busy. Why should I listen to what you have to say? So put yourself in that person's frame of mind and say, okay, I realize that you're really busy, but I have something important to say and to share that will help you. The person is also going to be asking, so what? Why does this matter to me? You know, I need good information to work with my livestock. I need good information now because there's a disease happening. And you might have answers to that, and then they're really going to listen to you once they know that you have really good information. Another theory that you're probably familiar with is that the medium is the message. This is called technological determinism. And we can see this in science communication because peer-reviewed papers and then presentations at conferences are very common forms of communication. And then for the public, we have other mass media forms like radio, visual aids, and so on. But basically what this theory is talking about is that once you've chosen a certain way to communicate with someone, you've already determined what the message is. So you've chosen to communicate with a scientific paper, that already helps to form the message. If you've chosen to communicate through the radio, that's going to help form the message as well. It's obviously reaching a very different audience, and it's going to be formed in a very different way. So think about how there's sort of a gap between the way scientists tend to communicate and the public tends to communicate, and think about how the medium that you're using, whether it's social media, radio, television, or just even face-to-face, how that affects the message that you're sending. And this could also be thought of as a left brain, right brain dilemma that researchers are really focused on analytical left brain thinking, whereas communication is more of an art form. It's messy, it can be very colorful and exciting, but it can be somewhat intimidating in terms of, there's so much potential for failure and for doing things wrong and getting the wrong reaction. Even when you've said something very clearly, it can be completely misunderstood. So this is another way just to keep in mind that you want to tap into, your upside down brain, the other ways of thinking to reach the public. So in this picture, we see a young woman on the left, and she's one of the sentries who's working with this woman in Nepal to transfer information, and she gets information from her smartphone. And so if you think about her as another type of audience, she's a young person. She's someone who's moving from a village into the city of Kathmandu to get an education. So she's kind of upwardly mobile. She's thinking about her future employment, things that are important to her family, her friends, and technology. So when you're trying to reach this type of audience, the person on the left, you want to adjust the medium that you're using, because social media will be very important, and that's going to affect the message as well. So I just want to emphasize the importance of whenever you're planning outreach, planning to reach an audience, you want to define them first. Who is this audience? Is it an older or more traditional audience? Is it a younger, maybe more fluid audience that's adapting the newest technology day after day? And then tailor your message based on the definition of that audience. And also, as we mentioned, choose the right kind of media, the right form, whether it's a poster, which is a form of media, or some kind of technology. So if I were reaching out to this young person, my message would probably focus on her future. Your future depends on X, Y, and Z. If I'm reaching out to the older woman, to Nana, I'm going to focus on her cow because I know she loves that cow, and she's going to listen to anything that pertains to the thing that she loves. So I'm going to encourage you to take up social media, which some of you may have already done, but this is something that takes a lot of practice and time to hone as an art form, as a skill. And here at the Livestock Lab, we have Twitter and Facebook as our primary forms of social media. So I'm going to take an example from our social media account of a successful tweet and talk about this. Talk about the anatomy of this tweet on the right. So the audience is actually somewhat defined within the tweet itself. If you see the @ sign that has our username and other usernames in there, @Ilri and so on. And that is a mention. It will send this message directly to those entities, to those people, and then they can forward it to their followers. And this is how something takes on a life of its own. But let me just walk through, for those of you who are not so familiar with Twitter, what are the various parts of a tweet, and then encourage you to try using it. So at the very top, you see this round picture, and that is our profile picture of the Livestock Lab, and then you see our username. And then the message itself, which recently Twitter has expanded from 140 to 280 characters. So you have double the space now. It's still very, very limited. It's even much more limited than an elevator speech. So you have about 1 to 2 sentences to transmit information. So this is a very condensed form of outreach, but it's free and it's very easy to learn how to use. If you look at an example of a mention of @Ilri, it has 20,000 followers. So by including them in our message, we've just opened up a whole new broad spectrum of people that we could potentially reach. Now our Twitter account has 392 people, and that's after more than a year of building up our account. It really takes time to build up thousands and thousands of followers. So I would encourage you, instead of starting your own account, really work with your institutions, with other communicators, and with us, of course, to reach out. And if you do have your own accounts, that's great too as well. It's going to help you to practice. You see also there's a graphic here, there's a photograph, which usually makes a tweet more interesting to people. And then at the bottom, there's a list of how many retweets, which means that a user shared it with her followers. So there were 13 times that this was shared, and that's a great thing. And to improve this tweet, I would add a URL, add a website so that someone can click on that URL and go and read more about this topic. And then you can also add hashtags, such as in February, there was this campaign called Febudairy, which can kind of take on a life of its own. It becomes, a buzzword. And as we said, it's the power of media is to start these conversations and to guide people's dialogues. And so this was a dialogue that happened in February. So here we are at challenge number 2. And basically I'm asking you to post or respond to something on social media. And again, you can work with someone in your institution to do this. The tweet or the Facebook post or any kind of message you want to do, I want you to try and just answer these basic questions for your audience, for the reader. Why should the reader care about your research? And start with that reader's needs and wants. Don't start with the title of your project to show them how important you are in your work is. Think about what that audience needs and wants first. Then you can get to your important journal. Think about what's interesting to the reader. Make it relatable with stories. Are there analogies to help them understand? If you're working in a really complicated technical area, let's think about how we can translate that for someone who may not have that perspective. And then share potential action. Should you learn more? Can you go to a website to really read more in depth? Because obviously in the social media, you're just scraping the surface. You're just getting attention. You can really do this. You can really hone in on that bottom line that's motivating public audiences and start there, and then get to those supporting details later. And again, this is kind of turning our thinking upside down, taking ourselves out of our comfort zone in the way that we usually think about presenting information, and presenting it in another way. So I wanted to show a part of this video on top tips on communication, just to cover a few things that I may not have covered yet. The link is there, and you can go and watch this later on your own to gather some of these interesting tips. This was just a supplement to what we were talking about today. Storytelling obviously is important, avoiding using jargon that people don't understand, and other things you've probably heard before. This is a good reminder, though, of some of those essentials. All right, and now for your final challenge of the day, I want to encourage you to become a copycat. And that's basically for you to go out and find some good examples of good communicators. They could be scientists or non-scientists, and copy and follow their lead. Who communicates science well? It's really hard to think of a lot of good examples, but there's one pictured here. Neil deGrasse Tyson, he's an astrophysicist and the director of the Hayden Planetarium in New York City. And he's really one of the few people in the United States that people will recognize his face and say, oh yeah, I know who he is. He's kind of a celebrity now, but he's very skilled at the art of communication. He uses radio, television, and scientific communication forms as well. Obviously, he works at a planetarium, so he knows how to reach out to many diverse audiences, and I really encourage you to look him up, maybe follow his podcast or something that appeals to you, and learn what he does. How does he start his interactions with an audience? He usually tells a story. He usually makes it personal. So this is someone that we can definitely imitate. He's a friend of Carl Sagan, which certainly doesn't hurt his reputation. He obviously is a very solid scientist, but he's also a great communicator, and that's kind of a rare balance to strike. But I think you can also look outside of the scientific community. Who are people who have inspired you? Who really gets your attention and makes you want to learn more about their field? Start to analyze and extract things that they've done. But instead of just simply, repeating what that person has done, also make it your own, because as Neil deGrasse Tyson will say, really the most important thing is to be yourself and to represent yourself and your truth. So add your personal touch to this. I will caution you, as the title of this book shows here, to don't be such a scientist, because as we know, scientists may communicate in one way and that may not resonate with the public. So you're going to have to try to do some upside down thinking. And I believe that you will do that. Many of you are already very skilled communicators. You may just have to think about new audiences you want to reach and kind of refine those skills. Essentially, what I wanted to do here at the end of this talk was to remind you of some of the things that I've talked about. Let's skip over the part about the mass media and popular media. We can chat about that. So I gave you 3 challenges today. Explain your research, your work to an individual, to a neighbor, to someone who doesn't know about your work, and see how they react and see how well they understand what you've shared with them. So that's challenge 1. Challenge 2 is for social media. Whether you're a beginner or an expert, find a way to post about your research that takes on a different tone, that really thinks about the audience's needs first, what they're going to love, and start there. So that's challenge 2. And then the third challenge is to look for other communicators and look for great examples that you can borrow from and start to learn from. And I also want to encourage you to reach out to the communications professionals around you at your organizations. Reach out to me. Let's start working together to improve our practice. And as a reminder of what we've gone over today, I wanted to show you that graphic again of the upside down thinking, where researchers tend to think in that upside down triangle, and then well, I'm calling it upside down, but it depends on your perspective, right? The triangle that's facing one way might represent your typical style of communicating, and then for the public, it's the opposite. So really keep that in mind as you're planning your outreach to these various stakeholders and various audiences. And then think about each of these audiences as a subset of individuals. Can you hone in on one person who represents that audience? Is it a younger person, an older person? Do they, their gender issues? Are there financial issues that the person is obsessed with or dealing with right now? And that's where I also want to come back to the context of the countries and the places where you're working in. You know what struggles people are facing. You know what's important to them. So really hone in on that and begin from that perspective. And also, we talked a little bit about the power of the media to guide conversations. So this is a power that you can grab a hold of. If you want people to think about livestock disease, you know, this is a chance, this is an opportunity for you to do that through social media, through other forms of really direct outreach, to get the conversation going, and then it can take on a life of its own. Just lastly, I want to emphasize that practice makes perfect. Although in communications, it's probably never going to be perfect. You're never going to reach that finish line. It's a continual refining of your practice, continually learning and growing. And as I mentioned, you know, this is a lifelong journey for your entire career, but I do believe that the benefits will pay off. And if you start investing now, little by little, improving your practice, you will reap great rewards from that. So I hope that these words and ideas have inspired you, and that you will take the opportunity to grab hold of these challenges and reach out, find new audiences, find new ways to reach those audiences. And by doing that, you can really end up changing their lives. So I thank you for your attention. I'll ask if you want to unmute your phones. We can start to have a bit of a dialogue here. I'm sorry about the PowerPoint going down and our technical difficulties, but you know, in communication, anything can happen. And so we had an example of that right here. Fortunately, I had some notes here. I was somewhat prepared to deal with that. So hopefully it didn't cause too much of a disruption. So I want to open up the floor to questions and see what people are thinking about.
Hi, Jim. Corey Brown here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. I love the upside down thing. And I think that's so true about how we give lectures too. And I think as most of us who are communicating like this, we're professors, so we're used to explaining things in 40-minute allotments. And if you can just be really pithy and get to the bottom line first, it's going to help in teaching as well as, you know, all the communication we do. So thanks a lot. It's a good paradigm. I'm going to keep it in mind.
Thank you. I remember at the annual general meeting, when you opened your talk by taking out a bill, a 100-beer note from your wallet and showing it to us and teaching us that there are scientists on this note on the currency in Ethiopia, and I'll never forget that. So I want to applaud you for that best practice.
Thank you.
So this webinar is going to be made available to anyone in the lab who's interested, and so we'll be working on this recording and sharing it. Hopefully there are other questions and ideas. Please share your questions with me by email or other forms if you don't have a question right now. Are there any other questions at the moment or any other comments?
Yeah, hi, Jim. This is David Salmon speaking. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hi, David.
Jim, I thought this was very interesting and well-presented seminar. Thank you for putting it together. This is something the External Advisory Committee felt was really important. The question I have is with regard to, we are assuming that people want to hear us as communicators. How do we address the issue of communicating with people who may not even know that it's important to hear our message or may not want to hear it? You sort of addressed that informally in your presentation, but it seems to me that's one of the principal challenges we have to overcome. That is getting listeners to tune into what the message is and to understand the value of what it is we're communicating. How do we make a convincing case that they need to open their ears and open their eyes and listen?
Well, that is the fundamental challenge, right? In communicating is if someone's not listening to you, then you're not having a dialogue, you're just talking to yourself. And so, yeah, I really think we have to keep reminding ourselves that audiences are in a different frame of mind than we are. And we really have to think about, you know, where they are at the moment, their challenges, their needs first before our own. And it's really, you know, it's a challenge, it's a difficult thing. And I think also for scientists and for getting research information out, it may not be so popular, or it may not take on this viral video kind of life of its own, like celebrities and other, cute cats and things are so easy to communicate about because they're entertaining. And the information we have may not be entertaining, but it is important. And so I think if we, start with the importance to improving your finances. If you can convince someone that, your family is going to be better off with this information if you give me some time to share it, I think they're going to listen to you. That if you're having a problem, I know that you're like mastitis that you're dealing with, I have some information, I have some ideas that can really help you and your community. So yeah, that really is the great challenge of this. But I do want to encourage us to kind of step out of our own, triangle of thinking, to step into the audience's, the other person's point of view, and start there.
This is Joyce, Jim.
Hi, Joyce.
Hi. I missed part of your presentation because I did not have the link. We got it settled, and I was able to see the rest of it. Will this be available, your presentation be available either via the web, email, however, so that we can review it?
Definitely. We'll definitely share this with you by email. It will also be posted somewhere so that it can be, shared with many people.
Okay.
So that's the intention. That this is just the beginning. It's we're recording it so that we can share it widely and gain more audiences for this talk. But I think it's also just the beginning of a conversation. We are finishing the draft of our communication strategy for the lab, and so this is part of it. This is sort of a launch of that to start us thinking more and more about how we can communicate with the public and how we can do it better.
Thank you very much.
All right, any other questions before we conclude?
Hi, Jim. This is Emily Oma.
Hi, Emily.
Yes. My question, maybe I didn't hear it well because I joined in a little bit late. I would like to find out if there's any type of communication support that we could tap into, from your team.
Definitely. And I mentioned that I'm here as a resource, and so I definitely want you to communicate with me, share your ideas, and we can collaborate together. I also want to encourage you to work with people, other communicators in your organization. I'm also thinking that I'd like to put together some resources to share with people that were not shown today. So this has inspired me to think of other books, videos, and other ways of outreach that I can share. But definitely, yeah, we're here as a resource, and I also want you to think about the people in your within your organization and your realm of activity. I'm sure there are professional communicators there who are also willing to help.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, we're kind of working on this strategy, and because we're so broad and so wide, we really have to think of a partnership approach to reaching out to the many stakeholders, the many potential audiences that we have. We can do as much as we can as a group of individuals, but if we tap into our partnerships and that larger network, I think that can really expand our impact. All right, so we can take one more question, or we can wrap things up. Anything else we'd like to say or share? Anyone else? Okay. Well, thank you everyone for paying attention. I really appreciate that. And hopefully you've gained some inspiration, some ideas. And as I mentioned, I look forward to working with you, supporting your communications, your outreach in the days, weeks, and years to come. Thank you.